There are moments in history when the world shifts beneath our feet, when a single invention reshapes everything that follows. The automobile is one such invention. But its story doesn't begin with gleaming chrome or roaring engines. It begins with a boy standing in a machine shop, feeling the rhythm of pistons pumping like giant hearts, breathing in the scent of hot metal and coal smoke, and sensing, perhaps without quite knowing it, that he was witnessing the future being born. This is the story of how one man's obsession transformed human civilization, how his wife's courage proved the impossible, and how their creation spread across continents with unstoppable momentum. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On November 25th, 1844, in the town of Mühlberg, Germany, a child enters the world who will change it forever. Karl Friedrich Benz arrives as the son of Johann Georg Benz, a locomotive engineer who understands the power of steam and steel, who knows intimately how metal can be shaped to harness energy and transform it into motion. But fate is cruel to young Karl. Just 2 years after his birth, his father dies, leaving behind a widow and a boy who will spend his childhood in poverty, watching other children play while he works odd jobs to help his mother survive. Yet something remarkable happens in those difficult years. Karl's mother, Josephine, makes a decision that will echo through history. Despite having barely enough money for food, she insists her son receive an education. She sees something in him, a hunger for understanding, a need to know how things work, why they move, what makes them tick. And so Karl attends the local polytechnic school, where he excels not through privilege but through raw determination, through staying awake by candlelight studying principles of mechanics and thermodynamics, while his stomach growls with hunger. Picture him at 15, standing in a machine shop for the first time. The air is thick with the smell of oil and hot metal. Massive pistons pump up and down, driving shafts that spin with hypnotic regularity. Steam hisses from valves, workers shout over the deafening clang of hammers on anvils, and young Karl feels something ignite inside him. This isn't just noise and chaos. This is organized power. This is energy being captured, controlled, and directed toward human purposes. The pistons pump like hearts, and in that moment, Karl begins to dream of creating his own living machine. He continues his education at the University of Karlsruhe, one of Germany's finest technical institutions, where he studies mechanical engineering with an intensity that concerns his professors. While other students enjoy beer halls and social gatherings, Karl haunts the university workshops, experimenting with every kind of mechanical device he can access. He builds small engines, studies gear ratios, calculates force and torque with obsessive precision. His notebooks fill with sketches of mechanisms that don't yet exist, solutions to problems no one else is trying to solve. But knowledge alone doesn't pay rent or buy materials. After graduation in 1864, Karl faces a brutal reality. He must earn a living. For years, he takes jobs designing bridges and buildings, work he finds suffocating despite its technical challenges. His true passion, engines, motion, the dream of a self-propelled vehicle, must wait while he drafts mundane architectural plans. Each day feels like a betrayal of his deeper purpose. He meets Bertha Ringer during these years, a woman whose intelligence and determination match his own. She sees his frustration, recognizes his genius, and makes a choice that will prove essential to everything that follows. She agrees to marry him, knowing full well that this man dreams of abandoning security to chase an impossible vision. The year 1878 arrives, and Karl can wait no longer. He quits his stable job designing bridges. He tells Bertha they're going to build something no one has successfully built before, a horseless carriage powered by an internal combustion engine. She doesn't discourage him. She doesn't remind him of their financial obligations or the comfortable life they're abandoning. Instead, she asks a single question: what do you need? What he needs is a workshop, tools, materials, and time. What he has is almost nothing. But Mannheim, the city where they've settled, proves to be exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Consider the ecosystem that exists there in the late 1800s. Bicycle manufacturers have perfected techniques for building lightweight metal frames. Clockmakers understand precision gearing with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Gas engine tinkerers, inspired by Nikolaus Otto's four-stroke design, are experimenting with small motors for industrial applications. Metallurgists have developed new steel alloys that can withstand tremendous heat and pressure. Chemical companies produce benzene and ligruin as waste products from petroleum refining, selling them for pennies because no one has found a use for them yet. All the ingredients exist. No one has combined them correctly. Karl Benz begins to assemble the pieces of a puzzle that most people don't realize exists. He rents a small workshop and begins the most important work of his life. But he's not alone in this race. 60 miles away in Stuttgart, Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach are pursuing the same dream. They don't know about Karl Benz. Karl Benz doesn't know about them. The stage is set for simultaneous discovery, for multiple minds converging on the same solution through different paths. Let's understand what they're attempting, because the challenge is far more complex than it initially appears. Humans have been using wheeled vehicles for thousands of years, pulled by animals or pushed by human muscle. Steam engines exist, but they're massive, requiring enormous boilers and tons of coal and water. A steam-powered vehicle small enough for personal use seems impossible. The boiler alone would weigh more than a horse. What's needed is an engine that generates power from controlled explosions, burning fuel inside a cylinder to drive a piston. This concept, internal combustion, has been proven by Otto's stationary engines, but no one has made one light enough, powerful enough, and reliable enough to propel a vehicle. Karl starts with nothing but drawings and determination. His first challenge is the engine itself. He needs something that produces consistent power, doesn't require constant attention, and weighs less than the vehicle it propels. Early experiments with two-stroke engines proved disastrous. The design is simpler. Every revolution of the crankshaft produces power, but the engines run rough, overheat constantly, and consume fuel at ridiculous rates. Karl fills notebook after notebook with calculations, trying to understand why these engines fail. The mathematics are unforgiving. Too much fuel creates floods that drown the spark. Too little produces weak explosions that barely turn the crankshaft. He needs money constantly, and it never stops being a problem. Building even a small engine requires precision machined parts, cylinders bored to exact specifications, pistons that fit with almost no clearance, crankshafts balanced to spin at hundreds of revolutions per minute without destroying themselves. Each part costs money they don't have. Bertha begins selling her jewelry, piece by piece, never telling Karl until much later. She visits pawn shops in different districts of Mannheim, quietly converting her dowry into time for her husband to fail, learn, and try again. The workshop becomes Karl's entire world. Workers arrive early and stay late, infected by his intensity. Suppliers provide parts on credit, betting their livelihoods on this eccentric engineer's vision. The air inside the shop carries a peculiar mixture of smells: hot metal, burning oil, vaporized fuel, and human sweat. Every surface is covered with tools, parts, and half-assembled mechanisms. Drawings cover the walls, showing iterations of designs that evolve day by day as Karl learns what works and what doesn't. Consider the social pressure building around this obsession. Neighbors hear explosions coming from Karl's workshop and assume he's gone mad. Local newspapers print mocking articles about Benz's folly, suggesting this bridge engineer has lost his mind. Friends stop visiting because they're tired of hearing about compression ratios and ignition timing. Bertha's family quietly suggests she leave this lunatic, before he drags her into complete poverty. But she doesn't leave. She brings him food when he forgets to eat. She handles correspondence with suppliers, always projecting confidence they can barely afford. She believes, and her belief becomes a foundation strong enough to support his work. The year 1880 arrives, and Karl makes a crucial decision. He abandons the two-stroke design entirely and commits to Otto's four-stroke cycle. This design is more complex intake, compression, power, exhaust, requiring precise valve timing and more mechanical parts, but it produces smoother, more reliable power. Karl begins building a four-stroke engine specifically designed for mobile use, lighter than any stationary engine, yet robust enough to withstand the vibrations and stresses of vehicle operation. By 1883, he has it a working single-cylinder four-stroke engine that weighs 440 pounds and produces 3/4 of 1 horsepower. To modern ears, this sounds pathetic. 3/4 horsepower couldn't power a decent lawnmower today, but in 1883, this is revolutionary. This engine is small enough to mount on a vehicle frame, reliable enough to run for hours without breaking down, and powerful enough to propel a lightweight carriage at speeds that would astonish anyone who sees it. But the engine is only the beginning. Now, Karl must solve problems no one has solved before. How do you transfer power from a rapidly spinning crankshaft to wheels? How do you steer a vehicle that weighs 700 pounds? How do you stop it? How do you keep the engine running at consistent speeds regardless of terrain? Each question leads to a dozen more. The challenges multiply faster than the solutions. Consider the carburetor problem. The engine needs a precise mixture of fuel, vapor, and air. Too rich and it floods, too lean and it misfires. This mixture must remain consistent whether the vehicle is sitting still, accelerating, climbing a hill, or coasting downward. Karl develops a float carburetor, a brilliant device that maintains constant fuel level using the same principle as a toilet tank, allowing air to pass over the fuel surface and pick up vapor in exactly the right proportions. It's simple, elegant, and absolutely essential. Then there's ignition. The fuel-air mixture must be ignited at exactly the right moment in each cycle, when the piston reaches the top of its compression stroke. Modern engines use spark plugs, but reliable electrical systems don't exist yet. Karl develops hot tube ignition, a platinum tube kept glowing hot by an external flame, positioned so the compressed mixture enters it at precisely the correct moment and ignites. It's dangerous, requiring an open flame near the engine. It's primitive by later standards, but it works, and reliability matters more than elegance. The year 1885 arrives, bringing both terror and triumph. Karl has assembled all the pieces. The engine runs consistently. The transmission transfers power through leather belts and gears. The steering mechanism allows directional control through a tiller. The vehicle exists, sitting in his workshop, ready for its first test. And Karl is absolutely terrified. What if it doesn't work? What if 5 years of obsession, his wife's sacrifice, his reputation, and his family's financial security have all been gambled on something that fails in the first 100 feet? New Year's Eve, 1885. While most of Mannheim celebrates the arrival of 1886, Karl Benz submits patent number 37435 to the German Imperial Patent Office. The application describes a vehicle powered by a gas engine. The language is dry, technical, focused on mechanical specifications, but this document will change civilization. It's the world's first patent for a practical automobile, the seed from which entire industries will grow, the blueprint for a revolution in human mobility. The patent office clerk who processes the application has no idea what he's handling. He sees just another mechanical patent among thousands submitted that year. He stamps it, files it, and goes home to celebrate the new year. Meanwhile, 60 miles away, Gottlieb Daimler is working on his own horseless carriage, oblivious to what Benz has just achieved. In France, England, and America, other inventors are sketching their own designs for self-propelled vehicles. The race is accelerating. History is holding its breath. Karl Benz stands in his workshop on New Year's Day, 1886, looking at his creation. It's not beautiful. The frame is angular and crude. The engine sits exposed, all its mechanical violence visible. The wheels are tall and thin, adapted from bicycle designs. The seat is a simple bench. There's no weather protection, no comfort features, nothing that suggests elegance or refinement, but it's alive. When Karl cranks the engine, it coughs, sputters, and then settles into a steady rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that pulses with possibility. He doesn't know yet that his first public demonstration will end in disaster. He doesn't know that his wife will soon commit an act of extraordinary courage that will prove this machine's worth. He doesn't know that within 15 years, thousands of these machines will be crawling across Europe and America, or that within a century, they'll number in the hundreds of millions. All he knows, standing in his workshop with his hand resting on the warm engine, is that he's done it. He's created something new. He's given birth to a machine that will outlive him, outgrow him, and transform the world in ways he cannot imagine. The seeds of speed have been planted. Now comes the hard part, convincing the world that impossible has become possible, that the age of the automobile has begun, and that nothing will ever be quite the same again. The workshop breathes. If you stood outside Karl Benz's building on any day between 1880 and 1883, you'd hear it the rhythmic clang of hammers, the hiss of steam, the sudden bark of an engine firing and then dying, the shouts of men wrestling with metal that refuses to cooperate. And beneath it all, a tension building like pressure in a boiler, the sense that something impossible is being dragged into reality through sheer force of will. Inside, the air itself seems alive. Oil vapor hangs in golden clouds near the ceiling, where sunlight streams through dirty windows. The floor is a geography of metal shavings, each pile marking a day's work, a week's failure, a month's learning. Tools cover every horizontal surface, wrenches sized for bolts that don't exist yet, files for shaping parts no supplier can provide, measuring devices calibrated to tolerances that seemed absurd just years before. And in the center of this chaos, mounted on a wooden frame, sits the heart of Karl's obsession, the engine. But calling it the engine is misleading, because there isn't one engine. There are dozens, perhaps hundreds if you count every modification and rebuild. Each represents a hypothesis tested and often destroyed. Karl Benz is conducting an experiment with no precedent, no textbook to follow, no professor to consult. He must learn everything through direct confrontation with physics, and physics is an unforgiving teacher. The two-stroke engines come first, and they teach through violence. The concept seems elegant. Every revolution of the crankshaft produces power, making these engines theoretically more efficient than four-stroke designs. Karl builds his first two-stroke in early 1880, a beautiful piece of machining with a cylinder bore of 100 millimeters and a stroke of 150. He mounts it on a test stand, connects the fuel line, sets the hot tube ignition, and cranks the flywheel. For 3 seconds, it runs. The piston pumps, the crankshaft spins, and Karl feels triumph flooding through him. Then, the engine explodes. Not a gentle failure, not a sputter, and stop an actual explosion that sends metal fragments ricocheting around the workshop. The cast-iron cylinder has cracked from the base to the head, unable to withstand the thermal stress of repeated combustion. Karl and his workers dive behind benches as shrapnel bounces off walls. When silence returns, they emerge to find their beautiful engine in pieces. 3 months of work destroyed in 3 seconds. This happens 37 times. 37 two-stroke engines, each one a refinement of the previous design, each one failing in spectacular or insidious ways. Some explode immediately. Others run for hours before seizing, their pistons welding themselves to cylinder walls from excessive heat. Some vibrate themselves apart, bolts loosening and parts flying off like a mechanical self-destruction. A few simply refuse to start, no matter how Karl adjusts the fuel mixture or ignition timing, sitting silent and mocking on their test stands. Consider what each failure represents. Every engine requires precision, machining cylinders bored to exact diameters, pistons turned on lathes to tolerances of fractions of a millimeter, crankshafts balanced so carefully that a gram of extra weight on one side will cause destructive vibration. Each part costs money. The cylinder alone might cost as much as a skilled worker earns in a month, and Karl is destroying them, one after another, learning lessons that can't be learned any other way. The mathematics become his obsession. At night, after the workers have gone home, Karl fills notebooks with calculations. He's trying to understand why engines fail, to predict failure before it happens, to design components that can survive forces no one has measured before. The pressure inside a cylinder during combustion reaches 500 pounds per square inch or more. The temperature spikes above 1000 degrees Celsius. The piston accelerates and decelerates hundreds of times per minute, experiencing forces that would pulverize weaker materials. Every component must survive these conditions not once, not occasionally, but thousands of times without failing. The fuel system proves equally challenging. Karl experiments with every volatile liquid he can find: benzene, petroleum, ether, ligroin, even alcohol. Each behaves differently. Too volatile, and the fuel vaporizes before reaching the cylinder, creating an explosion risk in the fuel tank itself. Not volatile enough, and it won't vaporize properly, flooding the cylinder with liquid that can't burn. He needs something that vaporizes readily at normal temperatures, but remains liquid during storage and transport. Ligroin becomes his choice, almost by accident. It's a waste product from petroleum refining, the fractional distillation that produces kerosene for lamps and heavier oils for lubrication. Refineries produce ligroin whether they want it or not, and most of them dump it or burn it because no one has found a commercial use. It sells for pennies per litre. Karl discovers it has exactly the volatility he needs. It vaporizes readily when exposed to air, but remains safely liquid in a tank. This worthless waste product will become the lifeblood of civilization, but in 1881 it's just cheap fuel for Karl's experiments. By 1882, Karl makes his crucial decision. The two-stroke design, despite its theoretical elegance, produces too many problems he can't solve. The engines run rough, overheat constantly, and consume fuel at rates that make extended operation impractical. He commits fully to the four-stroke cycle developed by Nikolaus Otto: intake, compression, power, exhaust. This means twice as many moving parts, more complex valve timing, and heavier overall weight. But it produces smoother, more reliable power. He begins designing his four-stroke engine with obsessive attention to every detail. The cylinder will be single, to reduce weight and complexity. The bore will be 116 mm, the stroke 160 mm, giving a displacement of just over 1 litre. These numbers aren't arbitrary. They represent months of calculations, balancing power output against mechanical stress, engine speed against longevity. Too small, and the engine won't produce enough power to move a vehicle. Too large, and it becomes too heavy, defeating the entire purpose. The crankshaft must be forged from the finest steel, then machined on lathes that can hold tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters. An imbalanced crankshaft will vibrate itself to destruction within hours. Karl spends weeks working with a master machinist, testing different materials and heat treatments, searching for steel that combines strength with the ability to flex slightly under load without breaking. They settle on a chromium steel alloy, expensive but necessary, that can survive the violent reciprocating motion of the piston. The connecting rod linking piston to crankshaft becomes another obsession. It must be light, enough not to add excessive inertia, but strong enough to withstand forces that alternate between compression and tension hundreds of times per minute. Karl designs it with an I-beam cross-section, removing every gram of unnecessary metal while maintaining structural integrity. The bearings at each end must be perfectly aligned, or the rod will bind and seize. He experiments with bronze bearings, steel bearings, even wood impregnated with oil, before finding a combination that works. Now comes the carburetor, perhaps his most elegant invention. The engine needs a consistent mixture of fuel vapor and air regardless of speed or load. Too rich, too much fuel, and the mixture won't ignite properly, flooding the cylinder with liquid that washes oil from the walls and causes wear. Too lean, too little fuel, and the mixture burns too hot, potentially melting the piston or valves. And this mixture must remain consistent whether the engine is idling, accelerating, or working hard climbing a hill. Karl's solution is beautifully simple. He creates a small chamber with a float valve, exactly like the mechanism in a toilet tank. As fuel enters from the main tank, the float rises until it closes the inlet valve, maintaining constant fuel level. Air enters through an adjustable opening and passes over the fuel surface, picking up vapor. The amount of air can be controlled with the throttle valve, but the fuel-to-air ratio remains consistent. It's elegant, reliable, and requires no external power or complex mechanisms. The float carburetor will remain the standard design for decades. Ignition demands equal ingenuity. The compressed fuel-air mixture must be ignited at precisely the right moment when the piston reaches the top of its compression stroke and maximum pressure has been achieved. A moment too early and the explosion fights against the still rising piston, wasting energy and causing destructive stress. A moment too late and power is lost as the piston descends. Before full combustion occurs, Karl needs ignition timing accurate to within a few degrees of crankshaft rotation. Electric ignition systems exist, but they're unreliable and require batteries that don't hold charge well. Karl develops hot tube ignition, a platinum tube kept glowing by a small external flame, positioned so the compressed mixture enters it at exactly the correct moment. Platinum won't oxidize or corrode even at high temperatures, making it ideal for this application. The tube glows at approximately 600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to ignite the mixture instantly, but not so hot it causes pre-ignition. It's dangerous, an open flame near a gasoline engine, but it works with absolute reliability. By early 1883, Karl has all the pieces working individually. The engine runs on its test stand, producing its 3/4 horsepower with surprising smoothness. The carburetor delivers consistent fuel mixture. The hot tube ignition fires at precisely the right moment. The crankshaft spins at speeds approaching 400 revolutions per minute without destroying itself. But running on a test stand is entirely different from running on a vehicle, where every bump, acceleration, and turn adds new stresses and demands. Watch the ecosystem around Karl's workshop during these years. Suppliers provide parts on credit because they believe in this madman's vision, or perhaps because they can't afford not to if Karl succeeds. They'll have been part of something historic. Workers stay past midnight without extra pay, infected by the intensity of purpose that fills the building. They don't fully understand what they're building, but they sense its importance. They're not just assembling an engine, they're constructing a future. Bertha manages the impossible dance of keeping creditors patient, while Karl burns through money with alarming speed. She writes letters, projecting confidence they can barely feel, promising payments that depend on success that remains uncertain. She visits their few remaining wealthy acquaintances, hinting that investment opportunities exist for those with vision and courage. A few provide small amounts, enough to buy another month, another batch of materials, another chance to fail and learn. The neighbors grow increasingly hostile. The noise, the smoke, the occasional explosions, it's too much. They complain to local authorities about public nuisances and dangerous activities. Police visit the workshop, investigating reports of explosions that might be bomb-making. Karl must explain, repeatedly, that he's building an engine, not weapons, though the distinction seems academic to officers who see him standing amid smoking wreckage after another test failure. Local newspapers mock him openly. Benz's folly becomes a running joke. Cartoonists draw him as a mad scientist surrounded by exploding machinery, wasting his wife's money on impossible dreams. Former colleagues who once respected his bridge designs now avoid him at social gatherings, embarrassed by his descent into obsession. But Karl doesn't read the newspapers anymore. He can't afford the distraction. He's too busy solving problems that no one else has solved. The transmission system requires entirely new thinking. How do you transfer power from a rapidly spinning crankshaft to wheels that must turn at much slower speeds? Karl experiments with leather belt drives, similar to those used in factory machinery, but belts slip when stressed and break frequently. He tries chain drives borrowed from bicycle design, but chains require constant lubrication and adjustment. He eventually develops a system using leather belts for primary power transfer and differential gearing to split power between the two rear wheels, allowing them to turn at different speeds during corners. Consider the differential gear, an invention that seems simple until you try to design one. When a vehicle turns, the outside wheel must travel farther than the inside wheel, meaning they must rotate at different speeds. But both wheels receive power from the same drive shaft. The differential solves this using a clever arrangement of gears that allows speed differences while maintaining power to both wheels. Karl didn't invent the differential. It dates back centuries to Chinese engineering, but adapting it for a lightweight vehicle requires precision machining and careful attention to gear ratios. Steering presents unique challenges. A 700-pound vehicle moving at 10 miles per hour carries enormous momentum. Turning it requires overcoming significant forces. Karl experiments with various mechanisms before settling on a tiller system, a long lever connected to the front wheel through a series of pivots and links. It's not elegant, requiring substantial strength to operate, but it works. Later vehicles will use steering wheels, but Karl is inventing everything from scratch, and the tiller represents the simplest solution to an immediate problem. Brakes terrify him. Stopping 700 pounds of metal moving at speed seems almost as difficult as getting it moving in the first place. He develops a simple brake shoe system, leather pads that press against the solid rubber tires when activated by a lever. The friction generates enormous heat, and the leather wears quickly, but it works well enough for short trips. The idea that brakes might fail during operation haunts Karl's dreams. He imagines his vehicle careening down hills, unable to stop, smashing into buildings or people. This nightmare will prove prophetic, though not in ways he expects. By the end of 1883, Karl has created something extraordinary. The complete vehicle weighs approximately 700 pounds, with the engine accounting for nearly half that weight. It sits on 3 wheels, 2 large rear wheels, and a smaller front wheel for steering because 3-wheel designs are simpler and lighter than 4-wheel configurations. The frame is welded steel tubing, strong enough to support the weight, but light enough not to overwhelm the engine's modest power output. The seat is a simple bench that can accommodate 2 people, though barely. There's no weather protection, no suspension beyond what the solid rubber tires provide, no comfort features whatsoever. But it runs. When Karl cranks the flywheel, the engine catches and settles into its steady rhythm. He can adjust the throttle to vary speed, though the response is sluggish compared to modern standards. He can steer using the tiller, though it requires constant attention and significant physical effort. He can brake, though the process is gradual and requires planning. And most remarkably, he can drive it, actually pilot this machine around the interior of his workshop, feeling it respond to his inputs, sensing its weight and momentum, experiencing the absolute thrill of mechanical motion, untethered from animal power. The workers gather to watch these early indoor tests, cheering when Karl completes a full circle without incident, groaning when something breaks or the engine stalls. They've invested years of their lives in this project, working for uncertain pay, enduring mockery from their peers, believing in something they can barely articulate. And now it works. It's crude, unreliable, and limited, but it works. The impossible has become merely difficult, and difficult is something they know how to handle. Karl sits on the bench seat of his creation, feeling the engine vibrating through the frame, listening to its mechanical heartbeat, and allows himself a moment of pure satisfaction. He's done it. He's created a living machine, a device that converts chemical energy into motion through carefully orchestrated explosions, that steers and stops and accelerates in response to human control. It's not perfect. It's not even particularly good. But it exists, and existence is the hardest step. What he doesn't know yet is that creation is only the beginning. Proving this machine works in a workshop is entirely different from proving it works in the world. He doesn't know about the humiliations waiting just ahead, the disasters that will nearly destroy everything he's built. He doesn't know that his greatest achievement will come not from his own courage but from his wife's. He simply knows that today, in this moment, he has transformed dream into iron reality, and nothing will ever quite be the same. The living machine breathes, waiting for its chance to show the world what it can do. Success in a workshop means nothing on a public street. This is the lesson Karl Benz learns with brutal clarity through 1884 and into 1885. His machine works beautifully within the controlled environment of his building, running smooth circles on the wooden floor, responding predictably to throttle and steering inputs. But the real world is chaos incarnate, uneven cobblestones, sudden hills, curious crowds, nervous horses, and the merciless judgment of people who've never seen anything like this machine and aren't sure whether to marvel or run for their lives. The first public demonstration is scheduled for July 3rd, 1884. Karl has been planning this for months, choosing a quiet street in Mannheim where the cobblestones are relatively smooth and traffic is light. He's made every preparation he can imagine. The engine has been thoroughly tested. Every bolt has been checked and double-checked. The fuel tank is full. The hot tube ignition glows at perfect temperature. His workers are positioned along the route in case assistance is needed. Bertha stands at the starting point, her face carefully composed to hide her terror, because she knows as well as Karl does that everything depends on this moment. A small crowd gathers, perhaps 50 people drawn by rumours that the madman Benz is finally going to demonstrate his contraption. Some are genuinely curious. Others have come specifically to watch him fail, to vindicate their mockery, to confirm that this entire obsession has been foolish from the start. Karl cranks the engine, and it catches immediately, a good sign. The familiar rhythmic sound fills the street, drawing more onlookers from nearby shops and residences. He climbs onto the bench seat, adjusts the throttle slightly, and releases the brake. The vehicle lurches forward. For 20 feet, perhaps 30, everything works perfectly. The engine maintains steady power. The wheels roll smoothly over the cobblestones. Karl steers carefully, keeping the machine centered in the street. The crowd murmurs with surprise. It actually works. This impossible thing is actually moving under its own power. And then, disaster strikes. The leather belt that transfers power from the engine to the rear axle begins slipping. Karl feels it immediately, a loss of power, a subtle change in the engine's sound as resistance disappears. He tries to compensate, adjusting the throttle, but the belt is already too loose. The vehicle slows, coasts, and then the belt breaks completely with a sound like a gunshot. Suddenly powerless, the machine veers to the right. Karl pulls desperately on the tiller, trying to steer back to center, but 700 pounds of momentum carries the vehicle inexorably toward the side of the street. It crashes into a brick wall with a sickening crunch of metal and splintering wood. The impact throws Karl forward, and he barely manages to catch himself on the tiller. The engine, now freed from any load, races wildly for a moment before he can reach the kill switch. Silence descends, broken only by the hiss of steam from a ruptured waterline and Karl's own heavy breathing. The crowd erupts, some in genuine concern, others in barely suppressed laughter, most in a mixture of shock and vindication. Karl climbs down from the wreckage, blood running from a cut on his forehead, and surveys the damage. The front wheel assembly is bent, the frame has twisted, the steering mechanism is destroyed. Months of work, ruined in less than a minute. Workers rush forward to help push the crippled machine back to the workshop, and Karl walks beside it, acutely aware of the whispers and snickers following him down the street. Benz's folly indeed. The newspapers will have material for weeks. But what truly devastates Karl isn't the mechanical failure or even the public humiliation. It's the realization of how little he understands about the real-world operation of his machine. In the workshop, on smooth floors with no surprises, everything worked. Out here, with unpredictable surfaces and the stress of actual use, weaknesses appear instantly. The leather belt drive that seemed adequate proves completely insufficient. The steering mechanism that felt responsive on wooden floors becomes nearly useless on cobblestones. Even the solid rubber tires, which provided acceptable ride quality during indoor tests, transmit every bump and irregularity with brutal directness. He spends the next 3 months rebuilding, redesigning, strengthening every component he suspects might fail. The belt drive is replaced with a heavier leather belt reinforced with wire. The steering mechanism gains additional support brackets. The frame is welded with extra bracing at stress points. Every change adds weight, which reduces performance, which requires other adjustments to compensate. Engineering is an endless cascade of compromises, each solution creating new problems that demand new solutions. By October 1884, Karl is ready to try again. This second demonstration is planned for the town square during the weekly market, ensuring maximum exposure. If it succeeds, hundreds will witness automotive history. If it fails, the humiliation will be equally spectacular. Karl cranks the engine, which starts reliably, at least he's mastered that, and begins a slow circuit of the square. For 3 minutes, maybe 4, it goes well. The heavier belt holds. The steering responds adequately. The crowd parts cautiously as he approaches, uncertain whether this machine represents progress or danger. Children point and stare. A few men follow alongside, shouting questions Karl can barely hear over the engine noise. He completes 1 full circuit and begins a second, confidence building with each revolution of the wheels. Then he smells smoke. Not the normal smell of exhaust, but something different, more acrid. He glances down and sees flames licking from the engine compartment. The hot tube ignition has set fire to oil that's leaked from a loose fitting. In seconds, the flames spread to the leather belt, which ignites enthusiastically, producing thick black smoke. Karl yanks the kill switch and grabs the brake lever, bringing the machine to a shuddering stop in the center of the square. Flames now engulf the entire engine compartment. Panic erupts. The crowd, which moments before had been merely curious, now flees in genuine terror. Mothers grab children and run. Men shout warnings. Market stalls are abandoned as vendors sprint for safety. Convinced the entire machine is about to explode, Karl jumps down and tries to smother the flames with his coat. But it's hopeless. The fire is too large, too hot. His workers arrive with buckets of water. dousing the engine and filling the square with hissing steam. When the smoke clears, Karl's machine sits scorched and dripping, a monument to catastrophic failure. The town constable arrives, red-faced and furious. There are ordinances, he explains, about public safety. Endangering citizens with uncontrolled fire is a serious offence. Karl could face imprisonment. The constable demands that these demonstrations cease immediately until Karl can prove his machine is safe, which, given what everyone has just witnessed, seems unlikely in the extreme. Karl nods agreement, unable to speak, watching his dreams literally go up in smoke, while the remaining crowd whispers and points. The newspapers have a field day. Benz's infernal machine nearly burns Market Square, reads one headline. Another offers, mad engineer's device threatens public safety. The articles describe Karl as a dangerous obsessive, wasting his wife's money on machines that don't work and might kill innocent bystanders. Former supporters distance themselves. Suppliers who provided parts on credit begin demanding payment. The ecosystem that sustained Karl's work starts to collapse. Bertha finds him in the workshop that evening, sitting amid the wreckage of his creation, still smelling of smoke and defeat. She doesn't offer empty comfort. Instead, she asks practical questions. What caused the fire? Can it be prevented? What needs to change? Karl explains about the oil leak, the hot tube ignition, the impossibility of making any machine completely safe. She listens, nods, and tells him something that will prove prophetic. Then we make it safer. We keep working. The winter of 1884 to 1885 becomes a time of methodical problem-solving. Karl redesigns the engine compartment to isolate the hot tube ignition from any potential fuel or oil leaks. He adds shields and deflectors to contain any fires that do start. He improves the oil seals to reduce leakage. He tests and retests every component, not just for functionality but for safety. The machine that emerges from this process is heavier, more complex, and considerably more expensive than his original design. But it's also more robust, more reliable, and less likely to burn down a town square. During these months, Karl also confronts the fundamental physics of vehicle operation. The problem isn't just making the engine run, it's making the entire system work together under real-world conditions. Consider the torque issue. His 3/4 horsepower engine produces maximum torque at around 300 revolutions per, too minute. But starting from a dead stop requires tremendous torque, far more than the engine can produce at low speeds. The machine either stalls immediately or lurches forward violently, depending on throttle setting. Modern vehicles solve this with clutches and multi-speed transmissions, but Karl is inventing everything from scratch. His solution is a variable tension belt drive that acts as a primitive clutch, allowing some slippage during acceleration before fully engaging. It's not elegant, it wears quickly, and it requires constant adjustment, but it allows the vehicle to start moving without stalling the engine. Each small innovation like this represents weeks of experimentation, countless failures, and gradual refinement towards something that actually works. The steering challenges prove equally vexing. At rest, the tiller moves the front wheel easily, but at speed, the wheel wants to follow every irregularity in the road surface, fighting against steering inputs and creating a constant battle for control. Karl adds a spring-loaded return mechanism that helps center the wheel, but this makes steering require even more physical effort. He experiments with different front wheel sizes, finding that a smaller wheel requires less effort to turn but follows road irregularities more aggressively. Every adjustment trades one problem for another. Then there's the matter of stopping. The simple leather brake pads that seemed adequate during slow indoor testing proved dangerously insufficient at higher speeds or on downhill grades. The leather heats rapidly from friction, becoming slick and ineffective. Karl experiments with different materials, wood blocks, metal shoes, even cork, before developing a water cooling system that drips water onto the brake surfaces during operation. It's crude and requires frequent refilling, but it works well enough to prevent complete brake failure. Throughout these months, the financial pressure becomes crushing. Karl has exhausted his savings, Bertha's dowry is gone, and creditors are losing patience. The workshop rent is months overdue. Workers accept promises instead of wages, but promises don't feed families. Karl writes letter after letter to potential investors, describing his vision with desperate eloquence, but few people want to bet money on a machine that has publicly failed twice and might never succeed. One investor who does believe is Max Rose, a local businessman who sees potential in Karl's obsession. He provides enough capital to keep the workshop running through the spring of 1885 in exchange for a partnership interest. This infusion of funds allows Karl to purchase better materials, hire additional workers, and most importantly, buy time to solve the remaining problems. By summer 1885, Karl has completed his third major iteration. The vehicle looks substantially different from the machine that crashed and burned. The frame is heavier and more robust. The engine compartment is redesigned for safety. The steering mechanism has been completely rebuilt. The brake system is water-cooled. Every component has been tested individually and then tested again as part of the complete system. Karl conducts private tests on quiet roads outside Mannheim, gradually building confidence that this time, finally, it will work. He doesn't attempt another public demonstration. The authorities have made clear they won't permit it, and Karl can't risk another spectacular failure. Instead, he begins documenting everything: detailed drawings, specifications, test results, descriptions of every component and system. Because Karl has realized something crucial. Even if the machine works perfectly, convincing the world of its value will require more than demonstrations. It will require legal protection, official recognition, and documentation that can't be dismissed or ignored. On New Year's Eve, 1885, while most of Mannheim celebrates the arrival of 1886, Karl Benz sits in a government office in Berlin, waiting nervously. He's travelled here to personally submit his patent application, determined to ensure it's processed without delay or error. The clerk who receives patent number 37435 handles it with bureaucratic efficiency, stamping and filing it among hundreds of other applications received that week. The document describes a vehicle powered by a gas engine in technical language that conveys nothing of the blood, sweat, failures, and perseverance it represents. The clerk has no idea he's just processed one of the most important patents in human history. Patent 37435 establishes Karl Benz as the inventor of the practical automobile, the first person to successfully integrate all necessary components: engine, transmission, steering, breaking into a functional vehicle. Other inventors are working on similar machines, but Karl has documented his achievement first, giving him legal priority and historical recognition. He returns to Mannheim carrying the stamped patent certificate, feeling something he hasn't felt in years: genuine hope. The patent won't solve his mechanical problems or convince skeptics, but it provides a foundation of legitimacy. He's no longer just a madman with a dangerous obsession. He's a patent holder, an officially recognized inventor, someone whose ideas have been judged worthy of legal protection. But Karl knows the patent alone means nothing without a working machine. And working isn't enough. The vehicle must be reliable enough, safe enough, and practical enough to convince people it represents actual progress rather than mechanical curiosity. He's proven the concept is possible. Now comes the harder task of proving it's useful. The year 1886 arrives, and Karl has a machine that works reasonably well during careful operation on good roads in fair weather. What he needs is a demonstration so compelling, so unambiguous, that skeptics will be forced to reconsider. He needs someone brave enough to risk reputation and possibly life on his invention. He needs a journey dramatic enough to capture public imagination. He doesn't know it yet, but that someone is preparing to take matters into her own hands. Bertha Benz has watched her husband struggle for 8 years. She's sold her jewelry, managed creditors, endured mockery, and never once suggested he abandon his obsession. She believes in his vision with a certainty that exceeds even his own, and she's about to prove it in a way that will change history. But that story belongs to the next chapter. For now, Karl sits in his workshop on a cold January evening, looking at his patent certificate and his machine battered from testing, stained with oil and scorched from earlier fires, but functional. 3/4 horsepower seems like such a small amount of power. 700 pounds seems impossibly heavy. 10 miles per hour seems ridiculously slow. But these modest numbers represent something unprecedented. Human beings have created a machine that moves itself, that carries people without animal power, that transforms chemical energy into motion through precisely orchestrated mechanical violence. The explosions have taught their lessons. The humiliations have hardened resolve. The failures have eliminated weak designs and revealed what works. Karl Benz has invented the automobile, has documented his invention with legal protection, and has created a machine that actually runs. What happens next will determine whether this achievement matters to anyone beyond himself. The world is waiting, though it doesn't know it yet. History is about to accelerate, driven by controlled explosions and one woman's extraordinary courage. August 5th, 1888. The sky is still dark when Bertha Benz wakes her sons, Richard aged 15 and Eugen aged 14. She tells them to dress quietly, to pack small bags, and to meet her in the courtyard behind their house. The boys know something unusual is happening. Their mother has a look they recognize, a determination that suggests argument would be pointless. They dress quickly and follow her outside, where she stands beside their father's latest automobile, Model 3, the most refined version yet produced. Karl is asleep upstairs, exhausted from another late night in the workshop. He doesn't know his wife is about to commit an act that will define both their legacies. Bertha has left him a note that he'll find at breakfast. Gone to Pforzheim with the boys. Back in a few days. Nothing about the automobile. Nothing about her actual intentions. She knows if she asked permission, Karl would refuse. Too dangerous, too risky. The machine isn't ready for such a journey, so she's not asking. Pforzheim is 66 miles away, where Bertha's mother lives. 66 miles might not sound far to modern ears, but in 1888 it represents an almost unthinkable journey by automobile. No one has ever driven that far. The longest successful automobile trip on record is perhaps 8 or 10 miles, achieved under carefully controlled conditions. Bertha is about to attempt more than 6 times that distance on public roads, through villages that have never seen a horseless carriage, over hills and rough terrain, with no support vehicles, no mechanics waiting at intervals, and no guarantee that the machine will survive even the first mile. She pushes the automobile quietly into the street before starting it, not wanting to wake neighbours or alert Karl. Then she cranks the engine, once, twice, 3 times before it catches and settles into its familiar rhythm. The boys climb aboard, Richard beside his mother on the front bench, Eugen on a makeshift seat behind. Bertha adjusts the throttle, releases the brake, and they lurch forward into the pre-dawn darkness. History's greatest automotive journey has begun. The first problem appears within the first mile. The leather brake shoes, which work adequately for short trips around Mannheim, begin wearing rapidly from constant use. Bertha can feel the braking power diminishing with each application. She compensates by braking earlier and more gradually, but she knows this can't continue. There are steep hills ahead, where effective brakes mean the difference between control and catastrophe. They reach the village of Wiesloch by mid-morning, and Bertha makes a decision that will enter automotive legend. She stops at the local pharmacy and asks for Ligroin, the fuel her husband uses for his engine. The pharmacist, Willy Okel, stares at her in confusion. Why would anyone want petroleum cleaning fluid? Bertha explains patiently that she needs it for a machine. He sells her several litres, becoming unknowingly the world's first filling station attendant. This scene will repeat throughout the journey. Bertha stopping at pharmacies, explaining her unusual request, and pharmacists providing fuel with expressions of bewilderment. Beyond Wiesloch, the road climbs steadily. The engine labours, its 3/4 horsepower struggling against the grade and the vehicle's weight. Bertha adjusts the throttle, trying to maintain momentum, but the machine slows inexorably. The boys jump down and push from behind, adding their muscle to the engine's power, and together they crest the hill. This will become standard procedure. Steep grades require all three of them, working together, the engine pulling while the boys push. Then the chain breaks. The drive chain connecting engine to rear axle snaps with a sharp crack, leaving them stranded on a country road miles from any town. Bertha examines the damage one link has failed, probably from metal fatigue. She needs tools and skills they don't possess. The solution arrives in the form of a village blacksmith, whose shop they reach by pushing the crippled machine nearly a mile. The blacksmith has never seen anything like this contraption, but broken chains he understands. He heats the failed link red hot, hammers it back into shape, and rivets it closed. The repair takes an hour, and Bertha pays him generously, knowing she's asking him to work on something completely foreign to his experience. When they start the engine and the chain holds, the blacksmith grins with professional pride. He's just become history's first automobile mechanic, though he'll never know it. The chain breaks 3 more times before they reach Pforzheim. Each time, Bertha finds a blacksmith willing to attempt repairs. Each time, confused craftsmen work on this bizarre machine, learning through direct experience about drive chains, tension, and the stresses of automotive operation. They're writing the manual for automobile repair through trial and error, creating knowledge that doesn't yet exist. The brake problem worsens. By afternoon, the leather shoes have worn nearly through, providing almost no stopping power. Bertha sees a cobbler's shop in the next village and has an inspiration. She asks the cobbler to nail fresh leather onto the brake shoes exactly as he would attach leather to a shoe sole. The cobbler complies, bemused but willing, creating what might be the first brake pad replacement in automotive history. The fresh leather provides improved braking, though Bertha knows it too will wear quickly. They approach the steepest challenge of the journey, a long, winding descent into a valley where poor brakes could prove fatal. Bertha tests the brakes at the top and finds them dangerously inadequate for controlling 700 pounds of machine on a steep downgrade. The physics are simple and terrifying. Gravity will accelerate them beyond the brake's ability to control, and the road offers no safe places to crash. She makes a decision born of desperation and mechanical intuition. Instead of using brakes alone, she downshifts the transmission into a lower gear, forcing the engine to resist the downward motion. This technique, engine braking or gear reduction braking, doesn't yet have a name because Bertha is inventing it in real time. The engine roars at high revolutions, protesting the unusual load, but it works. They descend slowly, the combination of brake shoes and engine resistance, keeping speed manageable. At the bottom, Bertha releases a breath she didn't know she was holding. She's just pioneered a technique that will become standard practice for every driver who follows. Throughout the journey, they encounter reactions ranging from wonder to terror. In one village, a priest stops them and delivers an impromptu sermon about the evils of machines that move without God's creatures pulling them. He calls the automobile a devil wagon and urges villagers to cast stones at it. Several actually do, though their aim is poor and the stones bounce harmlessly off the metal frame. In another town, children run alongside shouting questions and cheering. Some villagers drop to their knees in prayer, convinced they're witnessing either a miracle or demonic possession. Horses present unexpected challenges. When farm horses see and hear this chugging, smoking machine, many panic rearing, and bolting. Bertha learns to slow down when approaching horse-drawn wagons, to give animals time to process this strange sight and sound. She becomes history's first practitioner of defensive driving, anticipating how others will react to her vehicle and adjusting accordingly. The fuel stops become routine. Locate a pharmacy, request Ligroin, endure confused questions, pay, refill, continue. They consume approximately 7 litres for the entire journey, making their fuel efficiency around 9 or 10 miles per litre, remarkably good for such primitive technology. Each pharmacist becomes part of this historic journey, part of the network that makes automotive travel possible. By late afternoon, they enter Pforzheim, having travelled 66 miles in roughly 12 hours. Bertha's mother hears the engine noise and emerges from her house to find her daughter and grandsons climbing down from the most remarkable contraption she's ever seen. Bertha is covered in road dust and engine oil. The boys are exhausted from pushing up hills and making repairs. The automobile itself looks battered, stained, and barely functional. But they've arrived, proving something no one believed possible. Bertha immediately sends a telegram to Karl. Arrived safely in Pforzheim. Vehicle performed admirably, returning in 3 days. Karl receives this message over breakfast and nearly chokes on his coffee. His wife has stolen his automobile, driven it farther than anyone thought possible, and casually announces she's coming back. He's simultaneously furious, terrified, and overwhelmingly proud. The return journey, 3 days later, proves easier because Bertha now knows the route, the challenges, and the solutions. She stops at the same blacksmith shops, the same pharmacies, using the network of support she established on the outbound trip. Word has spread villages along the route expect to see this remarkable machine and its determined driver. People gather to watch her pass, waving and shouting encouragement. The hostile priest tries to block the road, but his congregation ignores him, more interested in witnessing history than enforcing his medieval worldview. When Bertha arrives back in Mannheim, Karl is waiting. They look at each other for a long moment, and then Karl does something unexpected. He laughs. He laughs at the audacity of what she's done, at the brilliance of proving the automobile's worth through action rather than argument, at his own foolishness for thinking the machine wasn't ready. Bertha has demonstrated what months of careful testing never could. The automobile works. It's practical. It's reliable enough for real-world journeys. It's not a laboratory curiosity or a rich man's toy, it's actual transportation. News of Bertha's journey spreads rapidly. Newspapers that mocked Karl's failures now print excited accounts of this extraordinary feat. Orders for automobiles begin arriving cautious at first, from wealthy individuals willing to take a chance on revolutionary technology. Karl's workshop transforms from a place of endless experimentation into an actual manufacturing operation. Workers who stayed despite uncertain pay now find themselves building vehicles for paying customers. The technical lessons from Bertha's journey prove invaluable. Karl immediately improves the brake system based on her experience. He strengthens the drive chain, adds redundant links, and implements better tensioning mechanisms. He increases fuel tank capacity so drivers won't need to stop every 20 miles. Each improvement directly addresses problems Bertha encountered and solved during her journey. Consider what she accomplished beyond the mechanical achievement. Bertha proved that women could master automotive technology, could navigate complex routes, could solve mechanical problems without male assistance. She demonstrated courage that equaled any military valor, taking calculated risks based on engineering judgment rather than reckless gambling. She showed that innovation requires not just invention but also validation, not just creation but also proof of utility. The 100-mile gamble counting both directions of her journey changed everything. Before August 5, 1888, Karl Benz owned a patent and a machine that worked sometimes under favorable conditions. After Bertha's return on August 8th, he owned proof that automobiles could revolutionize transportation. The difference between these two positions is the difference between interesting experiment and world-changing technology. Years later, Bertha would write in her diary that she never doubted the automobile would succeed. She saw in her husband's obsession something worth sacrificing for, worth risking for, worth proving to a skeptical world. Her faith wasn't blind. It was based on careful observation of Karl's work, understanding of the engineering principles involved, and realistic assessment of what the machine could accomplish. She gambled everything on that assessment, and history proved her right. The automobile virus has proven it can survive outside the laboratory. Now it's ready to spread, to multiply, to transform civilization in ways no one can fully anticipate. Bertha's journey is the spark that ignites this transformation, the proof of concept that makes everything else possible. The 100 miles she traveled will become billions of miles driven by millions of people, but it all starts here, with one woman's extraordinary courage and unshakable belief in mechanical possibility. Bertha's journey unleashes something that cannot be contained. Ideas, once proven possible, spread with viral inevitability. Within months of her return to Mannheim, orders for Benz automobiles arrived from across Germany, then France, then all of Europe. But this isn't simple commercial success. It's the beginning of a transformation that will reshape human civilization more profoundly than any invention since the wheel itself. The year 1889 sees Karl Benz produce 25 automobiles, a number that seems tiny until you realize each one represents a seed of possibility planted in new soil. Each buyer becomes an evangelist, demonstrating their machine to neighbors and friends, proving that automotive travel isn't just Karl's obsession but a practical reality available to anyone with sufficient wealth and courage. The automobile is becoming contagious. But Karl Benz isn't alone in this race anymore. That became clear in 1886 when Gottlieb Daimler, working independently just 60 miles away, completed his own automobile design. Daimler's approach differs from Benz's. He develops a lighter, faster-running engine and focuses on adapting it to existing carriages. While Benz builds complete vehicles from scratch, Daimler essentially motorizes horse-drawn designs. Both approaches work, both have advantages, and both prove that the automobile isn't a singular invention, but rather an inevitable convergence of technologies whose time has arrived. By 1890, 23 separate manufacturers are building automobiles across Europe. 23. Each brings slightly different approaches, different engineering solutions, different visions of what automotive transport should become. Panhard and Levasseur in France, Daimler in Germany, Lanchester in England. They're all chasing the same dream, pushing speeds higher, making engines more reliable, solving the endless cascade of practical problems that separate interesting machines from useful transportation. The speeds climb with remarkable rapidity. Karl's original 3/4 horsepower engine could barely achieve 10 miles per hour. By 1894, racing automobiles reached 20 miles per hour. By 1899, the fastest machines touched 35 miles per hour, speeds that seem suicidal to observers, accustomed to horses that rarely exceed 15 miles per hour even at full gallop. These aren't just numbers. They represent humanity's accelerating mastery over mechanical motion, our growing confidence that we can control forces we've only recently learned to create. Then comes 1894, and the Paris-Rouen race changes everything. This isn't just a competition, it's a public examination of automotive credibility. 102 vehicles register to compete over 78 miles of French countryside. 102! Just 6 years after Bertha's pioneering journey, there are enough automobiles in existence to field a competitive race with 3-digit participation. The rules seem almost quaint by modern standards. Vehicles must be safe, easy to handle, and cheap to run. They must complete the course without requiring excessive repairs. They must demonstrate that automobiles can outperform horses not just in theoretical maximum speed, but in practical, reliable transportation. The race becomes a referendum on the entire concept of automotive travel. 21 vehicles actually finish. 21 machines make it 78 miles, demonstrating reliability that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. The winner, a Peugeot powered by a Daimler engine, completes the course at an average speed of nearly 12 miles per hour, maintaining for hours what Karl's original machine could barely achieve at peak performance. The race proves automobiles are ready for prime time, ready to compete seriously with animal-powered transportation. Emile Roger recognizes the commercial opportunity before most. He secures rights to manufacture Benz automobiles in France, becoming history's first automotive franchisee. By 1898, Roger has sold 400 Benz Roger vehicles, making the automobile a French phenomenon as much as a German one. The technology spreads across borders, carried by entrepreneurs who see profit in mechanical horses that never tire, never need feeding, and never produce the mountains of manure that plague every city with significant horse populations. Consider that last point, because it matters more than it might seem. In 1890, a typical city horse produces 15 to 30 pounds of manure daily. New York City, with approximately 150,000 horses, deals with over 2,000 tons of horse waste every single day. Streets are ankle-deep in excrement during wet weather. The smell is overwhelming. Diseases spread through contaminated water and food. When automobiles promise to eliminate this problem, they're not just offering faster transportation, they're offering urban salvation. The automobile culture begins emerging organically, without anyone deliberately creating it. Driving clubs form where owners gather to discuss mechanical problems, share solutions, and organize group outings. Racing circuits develop, pushing technology forward through competition. Magazines appear dedicated entirely to automotive topics. Maintenance, advice, travel logs, technical specifications. A whole ecosystem of automotive enthusiasm springs into existence around these machines. And then, in 1896, Henry Ford crosses the Atlantic. He visits Karl Benz's workshop in Mannheim, studying every detail of the operation with intense focus. Ford is already experimenting with his own designs, but he recognizes that Benz has solved problems Ford is still wrestling with. He asks hundreds of questions, takes extensive notes, examines vehicles with the careful attention of an engineer who knows he's looking at his own future. When Ford returns to America, he carries knowledge that will help him build an automotive empire that will eventually dwarf even Benz's achievements. This is how innovation spreads, not through isolated genius, but through networks of people, sharing knowledge, adapting ideas, and pushing boundaries together. Ford learns from Benz. Benz learns from failures and successes of French manufacturers. French manufacturers study German designs and English innovations. The entire enterprise becomes a collaborative competition, where advances anywhere benefit progress everywhere. The speeds continue climbing. By 1897, racing automobiles regularly exceed 25 miles per hour. By 1899, the fastest machines approach 40 miles per hour, speeds at which wind resistance becomes a major factor, where aerodynamics matter, where the whole character of driving changes from careful control to rapid-fire decision-making. These are speeds at which accidents become deadly, and the first fatalities arrive with grim inevitability. Henry Lindfield becomes history's first automotive fatality on February 12, 1899. He's driving his new Daimler automobile down a hill in Brighton, England, when something goes wrong, whether brake failure, steering malfunction, or simply driver error remains unclear. The vehicle leaves the road and crashes down a steep embankment. Lindfield suffers severe injuries and dies the next day. His death marks a threshold, Automobiles are no longer merely dangerous machines that might explode or catch fire. They're now powerful enough to kill through normal operation, through the simple fact of moving heavy objects at high speeds. The lawsuit that follows establishes important precedents. Is the manufacturer liable? The driver? The local authority that maintained the road? The courts struggle with questions that have no precedent because the technology is too new for established legal frameworks. Eventually, they determine that drivers bear primary responsibility for safe operation, establishing a principle that remains central to automotive law over a century later. But Lindfield's death doesn't slow the automotive expansion. If anything, it accelerates it. The danger becomes part of the appeal for some, proof that automobiles represent genuine power rather than mere novelty. Rich young men race through city streets, terrifying pedestrians and horses, treating public roads as personal racetracks. Newspapers print outraged editorials about speed demons and reckless motorists, demanding regulations that don't yet exist because no one anticipated needing them. By 1900, approximately 8,000 automobiles exist globally, 8,000 machines that didn't exist 15 years earlier, 8,000 seeds of transformation scattered across Europe and North America. The number seems small against the millions of horses still providing transportation, but exponential growth is just beginning. The automobile has proven itself practical, reliable enough for daily use, and desirable enough that wealthy individuals are willing to pay prices equivalent to several years' wages for average workers. The social implications are emerging. Women discover unprecedented freedom. They can travel without chaperones, visit friends without arranging horse-drawn transport, escape domestic spaces in ways previously impossible. The automobile becomes a symbol of independence, especially for women frustrated by social constraints. Some men respond with horror, claiming that women lack the physical strength or mental capacity to control automobiles safely. These men are proven spectacularly wrong, as female drivers demonstrate equal or superior skill. Working-class people observe these expensive toys and wonder when automotive travel will become accessible to them. The answer is, not yet. A basic automobile costs more than most people earn in 5 years. But the trajectory is clear. As manufacturing improves and competition increases, prices will fall. Mass production is still a decade away, but its inevitability is apparent to anyone paying attention. The infrastructure begins adapting. Blacksmith shops transition from horseshoes to automobile repairs. Pharmacies stock ligroin and petroleum products specifically for automotive use. A few entrepreneurs build dedicated filling stations, where drivers can refuel without making pharmacy stops. Roads improve in response to automobile demands. The solid rubber tires and primitive suspensions of early vehicles make poor road conditions unbearable. Racing continues, pushing boundaries. The Paris-Bordeaux race of 1895 covers 750 miles at speeds exceeding 15 miles per hour. The Paris-Amsterdam-Paris race of 1898 demonstrates that automobiles can handle international journeys of over 800 miles. Each race proves reliability, builds public excitement, and drives technical innovation as manufacturers compete for prestige and publicity. Churches struggle with their theological implications. If God intended humans to travel at speeds beyond what horses can achieve, wouldn't he have created us with wheels instead of feet? Sermons denounce automobiles as prideful rejections of divine limits on human capability. Some congregations ban automobile ownership among members, but these religious objections fade as automobiles prove too useful to abandon for theological consistency. The turn of the century, 1900, arrives with automobiles firmly established as permanent features of advanced society. They're still expensive, still somewhat unreliable, still dangerous, but they're undeniably here to stay. Karl Benz, now 55 years old, has lived to see his obsession vindicated beyond his wildest early dreams. His workshop in Mannheim has become a thriving factory. His name appears on vehicles sold across Europe. His patents have made him wealthy, but Karl recognizes something profound. He hasn't finished inventing the automobile. He's only started. Each improvement suggests new possibilities. Each problem solved reveals three more. The automobile of 1900 is dramatically better than the crude machine Bertha drove to Pforzheim, but it's still primitive compared to what's clearly possible. Engines will grow more powerful. Transmissions will become smoother. Steering will become easier. Comfort will improve. The evolution has just begun. The infection has spread beyond containment. Automobiles are multiplying, improving, diversifying. The virus Karl Benz released into the world through sheer obsessive determination is now self-sustaining, carried forward by thousands of engineers, manufacturers, drivers, and dreamers who see possibilities he never imagined. The 23 manufacturers of 1890 will become hundreds, then thousands. What began with one man's vision and his wife's courage has become unstoppable momentum. The horse's 5,000-year reign as primary transportation is ending. The age of the automobile has truly begun, and the world will never be the same. The 20th century arrives, and the automobile stops being a curiosity and becomes a force that reshapes civilization itself. Between 1900 and 1925, the world transforms more radically than in any previous quarter century in human history. Cities spread outward, villages connect through ribbons of concrete, entire industries emerge from nothing, and human mobility increases by orders of magnitude. This is the story of how the automobile didn't just change transportation, it changed everything. Henry Ford stands at the center of this revolution, though he didn't invent the automobile or even the assembly line. What Ford invents is something more profound. He makes the automobile affordable for ordinary people. In 1900, automobiles cost $850 or more, equivalent to 2 years' wages for average workers. By 1925, Ford's Model T sells for $290, less than 3 months' wages. This price collapse isn't accidental. It's engineered through ruthless efficiency and revolutionary manufacturing. The assembly line is Ford's true genius. Before 1913, workers built automobiles one at a time, moving around each vehicle to install components. Each car took 12 hours or more to complete. Ford reverses this. Instead of workers moving to cars move past workers. Each worker performs one specific task repeatedly as vehicles roll past on conveyor belts. Door installers install doors. Wheel mounters mount wheels. Engine installers drop engines into frames. The specialization seems dehumanizing, and it is, but it's also devastatingly effective. By 1914, Ford's assembly lines produce a complete Model T every 93 minutes. The efficiency is almost incomprehensible. What once took skilled craftsmen 12 hours now takes less than 2, performed by workers with minimal training. Ford pays these workers $5 per day, double the typical industrial wage, because he needs reliable workers and because he recognizes something crucial. His workers are also potential customers. If automobile factory workers can afford automobiles, the market expands exponentially. The Model T itself is brilliantly simple. It has no unnecessary features, no comfort options, no aesthetic refinements. Ford famously says customers can have any color they want, so long as it's black. And he's not joking. Black paint dries fastest, allowing maximum production speed. The engine produces 20 horsepower, not impressive but adequate. The top speed is 45 miles per hour, enough for practical travel. The design prioritizes reliability and ease of repair over performance or luxury, and it works. Between 1908 and 1927, Ford produces 15 million Model T automobiles. 15 million! The world's vehicle population explodes from 8,000 in 1900 to 20 million by 1925. This isn't gradual growth, it's explosive multiplication. The automobile has become ubiquitous in advanced economies, transforming from luxury to necessity in a single generation. Cities respond by spreading outward. Before automobiles, cities were compact by necessity. People needed to live within walking distance of work, shops, and services. The radius of daily activity rarely exceeded 2 or 3 miles. But automobiles shatter this constraint. Suddenly, living 5 miles from work is practical. 10 miles becomes feasible. 15 miles is merely inconvenient rather than impossible. Suburbs emerge as a new form of settlement. These aren't traditional villages. They have no independent economic base, no local employment, no self-sufficiency. They're purely residential communities whose existence depends entirely on automotive transportation. People live in suburbs and commute to cities for an air, work, reversing the age-old pattern of living near employment. This seems natural to us now, but in 1910 it's revolutionary, even shocking. Entire communities designed around automobile ownership represent a fundamental reimagining of human settlement patterns. The infrastructure demands become enormous. 8,000 automobiles require minimal support, a few blacksmiths, learning repair work, pharmacies stocking fuel, perhaps some road improvements. 20 million automobiles require complete transformation of the built environment. Roads must be paved, not just major thoroughfares, but thousands of miles of secondary routes. Fuel stations must multiply from a handful to thousands. Traffic control becomes necessary. Parking space becomes a valuable commodity. Consider the filling station evolution. In 1900, perhaps 100 locations sell automotive fuel in America. By 1920, 15,000 dedicated filling stations exist. These aren't just fuel pumps. They're complex businesses requiring underground storage tanks, fire safety systems, trained attendants, and integration with petroleum distribution networks. The emergence of filling stations represents infrastructure investment equivalent to building thousands of miles of railroad, accomplished in just 2 decades. The concrete rivers begin flowing. In 1913, America has approximately 2 million miles of roads, but fewer than 10% are paved. Unpaved roads work adequately for horses and farm wagons, but become quagmires for automobiles during wet weather. Automobile owners demand better roads, and their political influence grows with their numbers. Between 1913 and 1925, states and the federal government pour billions of dollars into road construction. These new roads aren't simple improvements of existing paths. They're engineered systems with precisely calculated grades, drainage systems, and foundation layers designed to support heavy vehicles at high speeds. The concrete and asphalt industries expand exponentially, consuming vast quantities of natural resources. Forests are cleared, valleys are bridged, hills are cut through, the landscape itself is reshaped to accommodate automotive travel. The social transformations prove equally dramatic. Women gain unprecedented freedom and independence through automobile access. A woman with an automobile can work farther from home, visit friends without arranging complex transport, escape abusive situations, and participate in public life in ways previously impossible. The automobile becomes a tool of female liberation, despite male authorities trying to restrict women's driving through discriminatory licensing and social pressure. World War I demonstrates the automobile's military significance. Trucks transport supplies with unprecedented efficiency. Ambulances evacuate wounded soldiers from battlefields to hospitals in hours instead of days. Reconnaissance vehicles allow commanders to visit front lines quickly. The famous taxis of the Marne, 600 Parisian taxicabs requisitioned to transport troops during the First Battle of the Marne, in 1914 proved that automobiles can move armies with speed that horses cannot. Match. After the war, military surplus vehicles flood civilian markets, accelerating automotive adoption. Trucks proven in combat become delivery vehicles. Military ambulances become commercial transport. Soldiers trained to drive and repair vehicles return home with skills that make them valuable employees in the rapidly expanding automotive service industry. Prohibition, beginning in 1920, creates an unexpected automotive market. Bootleggers need fast, reliable vehicles to transport illegal alcohol while evading police. They begin modifying automobiles for speed and cargo capacity, creating precursors to modern hot rods. The mechanical skills developed by bootlegger mechanics engine, tuning, suspension modification, weight reduction, eventually benefit legitimate racing and passenger vehicles. Crime drives innovation as effectively as legal commerce. The automobile transforms courtship and family life. Young couples gain privacy impossible in horse-drawn carriages or homes with multiple generations present. Parking becomes a euphemism. Parents worry about unchaperoned teenagers with automobile access. Churches preach against the moral dangers of automotive privacy. But the social changes prove unstoppable. The automobile offers freedom that young people embrace regardless of adult concerns. Agriculture mechanizes rapidly. Trucks replace horse-drawn wagons for transporting produce to markets. Tractors, essentially agricultural automobiles, replace draft animals for plowing and harvesting. Farmers can cultivate larger areas, access distant markets, and respond to price changes faster. Rural isolation decreases as farmers can drive to town for supplies, entertainment, or social interaction, rather than making monthly trips by wagon. The petroleum industry transforms from modest enterprise to economic giant. In 1900, petroleum was primarily valuable for kerosene lighting and industrial lubricants. Gasoline was waste. By 1925, gasoline has become liquid gold, and petroleum companies wield enormous political and economic power. Oil exploration expands globally as demand grows exponentially. The geopolitics of petroleum, which will dominate 20th century international relations, begins emerging. Traffic fatalities become a grim reality. Speed and mass combine into deadly force. By 1925, automobile accidents kill thousands annually in America alone. Each death prompts demands for better safety regulations, driver training, vehicle design improvements. But the fatalities don't slow automotive adoption. People accept death risks as the price of mobility and freedom. Traffic control systems emerge from chaos. Early automobiles shared roads with horses, pedestrians, and streetcars, with no rules beyond common courtesy. As speeds and numbers increase, this becomes deadly. Cities begin installing traffic signals, painting lane markers, establishing speed limits, requiring driver licenses. The entire concept of traffic law emerges organically from necessity. The economic transformation proves revolutionary. Automobile manufacturing becomes America's largest industry by employment and value. Millions work in factories, dealerships, repair shops, filling stations, and related businesses. Steel production surges to meet automotive demand. Glass manufacturing expands. Rubber plantations in Asia grow to supply tire production. The automobile creates the first truly global industrial supply chain. Consider the scale of this transformation. In 1900, horses provided most transportation. Blacksmiths were essential tradespeople, and harness makers were skilled craftsmen. By 1925, horses are becoming rare in cities. Blacksmiths are transitioning to automotive repair, and harness makers face obsolescence. Entire professions disappear, while new ones emerge. The economic disruption is massive, painful for those left behind, but ultimately beneficial as automotive industries employ more people at higher wages than horse-based transportation ever did. Small towns along major roads prosper while isolated communities wither. Highway-accessible locations become valuable for businesses serving travelers, restaurants, hotels, service stations. Towns bypassed by major routes lose economic vitality as travelers no longer pass through. Geographic advantages that mattered for centuries become irrelevant, while new location factors emerge. Proximity to highways becomes more valuable than proximity to rivers or railroads. The automobile's environmental impact begins appearing, though few recognize it yet. Urban air quality decreases as exhaust fumes replace horse manure as the primary pollution concern. Oil spills contaminate waterways, discarded tires accumulate, lead additives in gasoline slowly poison ecosystems. But in 1925, these seem like minor concerns compared to the benefits of mobility and economic growth. Environmental consciousness won't emerge for decades. By 1925, the transformation is complete. The automobile has evolved from expensive curiosity to essential technology shaping every aspect of advanced society. 20 million vehicles on roads worldwide represent a civilization committed to automotive transportation. The infrastructure to support them, roads, filling stations, repair facilities, represents investment comparable to entire national budgets. The industries surrounding automobiles employ millions and generate wealth on unprecedented scales. Karl Benz, now 81 years old, watches this transformation with mixed feelings. The simple machine he created in his Mannheim workshop has spawned a global revolution beyond anything he imagined. His name appears on millions of vehicles. His basic design principles, internal combustion engine, transmission, steering, braking, remain fundamentally unchanged even as implementation details improve. He's witnessing the fulfillment of his obsession and perhaps wondering whether he fully understood what he was unleashing. The rivers of concrete continue flowing, spreading across continents, connecting isolated communities, enabling the suburban sprawl and economic integration that will define the 20th century. The automobile has transformed from mechanical novelty to civilizational foundation, and the transformation is far from complete. The age Benz initiated continues accelerating, carrying humanity toward futures that become stranger and more extraordinary with each passing year. Stand here, at this moment in history, and look backward across the century and a half since Karl Benz first felt pistons pumping in a machine shop. Look at what that moment has become. Over 1 billion automobiles now traverse the earth. They consume rivers of fuel, reshape landscapes, enable freedoms and create dependencies, connect communities and isolate individuals, represent humanity's greatest achievement in mechanical mobility, and perhaps our most profound environmental challenge. The automobile Karl created has grown far beyond his vision, evolved beyond recognition, yet remains fundamentally faithful to his original dream. But the dream itself is evolving. The internal combustion engine that powered Bertha's journey to Pforzheim, that multiplied across continents, that defined 20th century transportation, this engine is approaching its twilight. Not through failure, but through succession. The torch is being passed to technologies that would seem like magic to Karl Benz, yet serve the same eternal human desire to move faster, farther, and more freely. Electric vehicles represent the most visible transformation. The irony would amuse Karl: electric automobiles actually predate his gasoline-powered invention. In the 1890s, electric vehicles competed seriously with gasoline engines, offering smooth, quiet operation without hand cranking or mechanical complexity. But they failed because their lead-acid batteries were impossibly heavy and held pathetically little energy. A vehicle requiring half a ton of batteries to travel 30 miles couldn't compete with gasoline engines growing more powerful and efficient every year. By 1920, electric vehicles had essentially disappeared, killed by cheap gasoline and the electric starter motor that eliminated hand cranking. For nearly a century they remained technological curiosities, occasionally proposed but never practical. The fundamental problem remained unchanged. Energy density. Gasoline contains approximately 12,000 watt-hours of energy per kilogram. Lead-acid batteries store perhaps 40 watt-hours per kilogram. The physics seemed insurmountable. Then lithium-ion batteries changed everything. These remarkable devices store over 200 watt-hours per kilogram, 5 times more than lead-acid batteries. 200 watt-hours still seems pathetic compared to gasoline's 12,000, but electric motors are far more efficient than internal combustion engines. A gasoline engine converts perhaps 25% of fuel energy into motion, wasting the rest as heat. An electric motor achieves 90% efficiency or better. When you account for efficiency differences, lithium-ion batteries become competitive with gasoline for practical vehicle ranges. Modern electric vehicles travel 300 miles or more on a single charge, accelerate faster than most gasoline vehicles, require minimal maintenance, and produce no direct emissions. They're quiet, smooth, and increasingly affordable as battery production scales up. The transformation from impossible to inevitable happened in less than 2 decades. Karl Benz's mechanical heart, the internal combustion engine, is being replaced by spinning magnets and flowing electrons. But here's what remains constant: the fundamental purpose. Electric vehicles still serve the same human desires that motivated Karl's obsession. They provide personal mobility, freedom to travel when and where you choose, independence from fixed schedules and routes. The power source changes, but the dream remains identical. You can draw a direct line from Karl cranking his single-cylinder engine in 1885 to someone pressing the start button on a modern electric vehicle. The methods differ. The intention is unchanged. Self-driving systems represent perhaps an even more profound evolution. Consider what Karl would think of vehicles that see in all directions simultaneously, process 1.4 million calculations per second, predict pedestrian movements, maintain perfect lane positioning, and never get tired or distracted. These systems use cameras, radar, and LiDAR to perceive surroundings with superhuman accuracy. They make decisions in milliseconds that would take human drivers seconds to process. The technology seems like science fiction, but it's merely the latest expression of humanity's ancient desire to augment our capabilities through tools. Karl's automobile amplified human leg power through mechanical advantage. Self-driving systems amplify human perception and decision-making through computational power. Both represent the same fundamental impulse. We want to transcend our biological limitations, to achieve capabilities beyond what evolution provided. Current self-driving systems aren't perfect. They struggle with unusual situations, unexpected obstacles, complex urban environments, but they're improving exponentially, learning from billions of miles of real-world driving data. Within decades, perhaps sooner, vehicles that drive themselves will be safer, more efficient, and more capable than human-driven vehicles. The steering wheel itself, that fundamental interface between human and machine, may become obsolete. And yet, the essential relationship remains. Humans still decide where to go. We still choose destinations, plan routes, determine purposes. The vehicle still serves our intentions, carrying us toward goals we select. The machine amplifies human will, just as Karl's original creation did. The amplification becomes more sophisticated, but the relationship of tool-serving user persists. Hydrogen fuel cells offer another pathway forward. These devices combine hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity, emitting only water vapor. They refuel in 3 minutes as fast as gasoline vehicles and offer ranges of 400 miles or more. Hydrogen is the universe's most abundant element, available in unlimited quantities from water through electrolysis. The technology promises unlimited clean energy for transportation, but challenges remain formidable. Producing hydrogen requires enormous energy, more energy than the hydrogen will provide unless the production uses renewable sources. Storing hydrogen requires high-pressure tanks or cryogenic cooling, adding weight and complexity. Distribution infrastructure doesn't exist at scale. Whether hydrogen becomes the future of transportation or remains a promising technology that never quite achieves practicality depends on solving problems as challenging as those Karl faced in his Mannheim workshop. What matters isn't which specific technology succeeds. What matters is that humanity continues pushing boundaries, continues seeking better solutions, continues refusing to accept current limitations as permanent constraints. Karl's true legacy isn't the internal combustion engine. It's the demonstration that impossible barriers can be broken through obsessive dedication and willingness to fail repeatedly while learning from each failure. The statistics are staggering. Global automobile production exceeds 90 million vehicles annually. The automotive industry employs over 60 million people directly, and perhaps another 100 million indirectly through supply chains and related services. Vehicles consume over 15 million barrels of oil daily. The economic value of automotive industries exceeds $3 trillion annually. These numbers would mean nothing to Karl Benz, whose ambition was simply to build one working machine, but they represent the scale of the transformation he initiated. Yet for all this growth, for all the sophistication of modern vehicles, Karl would recognize the fundamental principles. Modern engines still use four-stroke cycles: intake, compression, power, exhaust, exactly as Otto designed and Karl implemented. Transmissions still transfer power from engine to wheels through gears, though modern automatic transmissions are vastly more complex than Karl's leather belt drives. Steering still pivots front, wheels to change direction. Brakes still use friction to convert kinetic energy to heat. The genius of Karl's design wasn't any single innovation, it was the integration of all necessary systems into a functional whole. Modern vehicles are incomparably more sophisticated, but they're still recognizably descended from that crude three-wheeled machine that Bertha drove to Pforzheim. Evolution, not revolution. Continuous refinement of fundamental principles rather than complete reinvention. Consider what connects Karl's workshop to today's automotive world. The obsessive attention to detail, the willingness to test and fail and test again, the recognition that each component must work not just individually, but as part of an integrated system, the understanding that reliability matters more than peak performance. These principles, learned through brutal experience in 1880s Mannheim, still guide automotive engineering today. The environmental challenges we now recognize weren't visible to Karl's generation. They saw automobiles replacing horses and eliminating the enormous public health problems of urban horse populations. They couldn't anticipate that billions of vehicles would affect global climate, that tire particles would contaminate oceans, that sprawling car-dependent cities would consume farmland and wilderness. We're now grappling with consequences of success, with problems created precisely because Karl's vision succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. But these challenges don't invalidate the fundamental achievement. Karl Benz gave humanity something profound: practical mechanical mobility, the freedom to travel independently, to explore beyond our immediate surroundings, to connect with distant places and people. This freedom has enabled economic growth, scientific discovery, cultural exchange, and personal opportunities that would be impossible in a world limited to human-powered and animal-powered transportation. The solutions to automotive environmental impacts will likely come through the same process. Karl exemplified obsessive engineering, willingness to try radical approaches, learning from failures, and refusing to accept that problems are unsolvable. Electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cells, better urban planning, improved public transportation. These represent not abandonment of Karl's vision but evolution of it, adaptation to new understanding and changed circumstances. Karl Benz died in 1929 at age 84. Having witnessed the complete transformation of human transportation, he saw his crude workshop prototype evolve into a global industry. He saw millions of vehicles traversing continents on networks of paved roads. He saw speeds increase from his original 10 miles per hour to racing cars exceeding 150 miles per hour. He saw his name become synonymous with automotive excellence through the merger that created Mercedes-Benz. But perhaps his greatest satisfaction came from something simpler. He lived long enough to know he was right. The authorities who threatened him with imprisonment, the newspapers that mocked his folly, the neighbors who complained about explosions, the experts who declared horseless carriages impossible, they were all proven wrong. Karl's obsession was vindicated completely and permanently. The impossible became not just possible but inevitable. Bertha survived him by 15 years, living to see World War II beginning to reshape the world yet again. She never sought fame for her historic journey, never claimed credit beyond what history naturally granted her. But she knew, as Karl knew, that her courage had been essential. Without her 100-mile gamble, Karl's invention might have remained a workshop curiosity, a footnote in technological history. She transformed proof of concept into proof of utility, and that transformation made everything else possible. Their legacy surrounds us. Every vehicle on every road represents, in some fundamental way, the fulfillment of Karl's obsession and Bertha's faith. The dream they pursued, mechanical mobility, freedom amplified through engineering, and human will expressed through controlled explosions, has become so embedded in modern civilization that we barely notice it. We simply expect to travel anywhere, anytime, in personal vehicles that obey our commands. The eternal engine isn't just the mechanical heart that powered Karl's creation. It's the human drive to transcend limitations, to refuse to accept that impossible means impossible, to obsess over problems until they yield solutions. That engine powers all human progress, all technological advancement, all transformation of ideas into reality. Karl Benz didn't just invent the automobile, he demonstrated what obsessive dedication can achieve when coupled with engineering skill and supported by unwavering belief. The story that began in a smoke-filled machine shop in 1840s, Germany continues today in research laboratories, developing next-generation batteries, in factories building millions of vehicles annually, in garages where enthusiasts modify and restore classic cars, in planning offices designing future transportation systems. The story continues because the dream continues the eternal human desire to move faster, farther, and more freely. Karl's 3/4 horsepower has become 1,000 horsepower electric motors. His 10 miles per hour has become 200 miles per hour supercars. His single crewed vehicle has become billions traversing every continent. But the fundamental dream remains unchanged. Humanity racing the wind, refusing to accept the limitations of biology, expressing freedom through mechanical motion. The eternal engine runs still, powered not by gasoline or electricity, but by human imagination and determination. As long as people dream of moving beyond their current boundaries, as long as engineers obsess over seemingly impossible problems, as long as the courage exists to risk everything on unproven visions, the engine Karl Benz created will continue running, and the journey that began with 3 wheels and an open flame continues accelerating into futures we can barely imagine, carrying forward the dream of one obsessive engineer and one courageous woman who together changed the world forever.